The rope cuts into Clara Washington's wrists as James Mitchell III tightens the knots around the ancient oak tree. His expensive phone records every second, while his three accomplices circle like predators enjoying their hunt. "This is what happens to uppity teachers who forget their place," he sneers. Zooming in on her face, racial slurs pour from his mouth like poison, while Tyler Brooks holds her shoulders against the rough bark. But what these privileged boys don't see is the small recording device hidden in Clara's jacket. What they can't imagine is that this footage will soon reach a Delta Force veteran who has spent 15 years learning how to destroy enemies completely. Marcus Washington and is about to teach these spoiled rich kids the difference between playing with power and facing someone who wields it professionally. Comment your country and hit subscribe because what happens next will change everything. 3 hours earlier, Clara Washington had kissed her husband goodbye at their kitchen table. Steam rose from her coffee mug while morning sunlight streamed through windows overlooking their peaceful suburban neighborhood. "Just another day with the privileged monsters," she had joked, adjusting her lesson plans for advanced calculus. Marcus looked up from his military newspaper with the focused attention that 15 years in Delta Force had ingrained. "How bad is it really?" he asked, studying his wife's face with tactical precision. Clara's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and small stress indicators that most people would miss were obvious to someone trained in reading human behavior under pressure. "They're testing boundaries," Clara admitted, stirring honey into her coffee while avoiding direct eye contact. "James Mitchell and his crew think Daddy's money makes them untouchable." She described the escalating incidents, whispered comments about her qualifications, mysteriously missing lesson plans. Parents complaining to administration about the new teacher who didn't understand Westmont Academy's standards. Marcus leaned forward. His wedding ring clinked against the table as he processed information like the intelligence briefings that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. "Testing boundaries means they're planning something bigger," he said quietly. "Bullies always escalate until someone stops them permanently." If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of justice. And hey, if these stories inspire you as much as they inspire me to tell them, consider hitting the thanks button below. Your support helps me continue sharing these powerful moments that need to be heard. Thank you so much for being here with me. Clara reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I can handle spoiled teenagers. Honey, they're just kids acting out because they've never had a teacher who won't let them slide by on family reputation." But Marcus's expression remained serious. 15 years of eliminating high-value targets had taught him that underestimating any enemy could be fatal. "Promise me something," he said, pulling out a small recording device no bigger than a button. "Wear this today. If anything happens, anything at all, I want evidence." Clara started to protest, but Marcus interrupted. "I've seen what entitled people do when their authority is challenged. Promise me." Clara clipped the device inside her jacket lapel. "Nothing will happen. They're just frustrated that someone finally expects them to actually learn mathematics." She gathered her materials and headed for the door. Marcus watched from the window as she drove away, military instincts nagging at him like an alarm he couldn't silence. Westmont Preparatory Academy rose from manicured grounds like a monument to wealth and privilege. Its Gothic architecture and perfectly maintained lawns spoke of tuition costs that exceeded most people's annual salaries. Clara parked her modest sedan between a BMW and a Mercedes. Student parking looked like a luxury car dealership showcase. The hallways buzzed with the comfortable confidence of teenagers who had never heard the word no without it being immediately reversed by a phone call from Daddy's office. Designer clothes, latest technology, casual discussions of European vacations, and family political connections. This was a world where 16-year-olds carried credit cards with no limits and expected the universe to accommodate their desires. Clara entered her classroom with the same determination that had carried her through MIT's rigorous mathematics program. She wrote equations on the whiteboard while students filtered in with varying levels of enthusiasm. Most genuinely wanted to learn. Calculus was challenging regardless of family wealth, and Clara's teaching methods were producing results that previous instructors had never achieved. But 4 students entered with the predatory energy of hunters who had spotted vulnerable prey. James Mitchell III took his usual seat in the back corner, flanked by Tyler Brooks, Connor Hayes, and Dylan Parker. These boys formed the untouchable core of Westmont's social hierarchy. Their fathers controlled politics, banking, law enforcement, and education respectively. "Morning, Mrs. Washington," James said, with exaggerated politeness. His tone carried subtle mockery that other students recognized immediately. Clara nodded professionally. 3 weeks of teaching here had taught her to recognize when psychological warfare was beginning. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," she replied calmly, turning to write calculus problems on the board. "I hope you completed last night's assignment on differential equations." The question was designed to maintain classroom normalcy while establishing academic expectations that couldn't be negotiated. James leaned back in his chair with practiced arrogance. "Actually, I had my tutor look at those problems, and he said they were unusually difficult for high school students." The implication hung in the air like poison. Clara was either incompetent or deliberately making things harder than necessary. MIT-level calculus requires MIT-level effort. Clara responded without turning around. "If you're finding the material challenging, I'm happy to provide additional tutoring during office hours." Several students smiled. They appreciated having a teacher who didn't lower standards to accommodate laziness. Tyler Brooks joined the attack. "My father's bank employs dozens of mathematicians, and he says most of these concepts aren't really necessary for practical applications." His family's financial influence usually intimidated teachers into accepting whatever narrative the Brooks children preferred. Clara faced the class directly. "Your father's mathematicians use these exact concepts for risk analysis, compound interest calculations, and investment modeling," she said firmly. "If you'd prefer simpler mathematics, I can recommend a basic algebra course that might better suit your current skill level." The public correction stung. Tyler's face flushed red while his friends exchanged glances that promised retaliation. Connor Hayes decided to escalate. "My dad says some teachers try to make themselves look smart by making students look stupid," he announced it loudly. "Maybe you should focus on teaching instead of showing off." The classroom fell silent. Other students shifted uncomfortably as the confrontation moved beyond normal academic disagreement into personal attack territory. Clara felt her pulse quicken but maintained professional composure. "Mr. Hayes, if you have concerns about my teaching methods, you're welcome to discuss them with your guidance counselor after class." Dylan Parker played his principal's son card. "Actually, my father might want to review your curriculum to make sure it meets Westmont standards," he said with smug satisfaction. "We wouldn't want students struggling because of inappropriate course difficulty." Clara recognized the coordinated nature of their attack. 4 different angles of assault designed to undermine her authority while providing plausible deniability for each individual comment. "Gentlemen, this is advanced calculus," she said firmly. "If you're not prepared for advanced level work, I suggest you speak with administration about transferring to a more appropriate course." The bell rang. Students gathered their materials, while the 4 boys remained seated, staring at Clara with expressions that promised this confrontation was far from over. Other students hurried past them. Everyone understood that James Mitchell's crew was dangerous to cross after the classroom emptied. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. The Spanish teacher had worked at Westmont for 8 years and recognized trouble when she saw it. "How did it go with the Golden Boys?" she asked. Closing the door behind her, Clara noticed the precaution and wondered what warnings were coming. "They're testing limits," Clara replied, erasing equations from the whiteboard with more force than necessary. "James Mitchell seems to think his father's political position exempts him from learning mathematics." Mrs. Rodriguez sighed deeply. "These boys have never faced consequences for anything. Their families donate millions to the school and threaten to pull funding whenever their precious angels get in trouble." She glanced toward the hallway nervously. Even discussing the subject felt dangerous. "What exactly am I dealing with?" Clara asked, recognizing that she needed intelligence about the battlefield she had entered. Mrs. Rodriguez checked the hallway again before answering. "James Mitchell is the governor's son. His family has covered up everything from academic fraud to criminal charges. Tyler Brooks comes from banking money that can buy silence from anyone. Connor Hayes has the police chief as a father. Evidence disappears whenever his son gets in trouble. Dylan Parker is our principal's boy. Administrative records get altered to protect him." Clara absorbed this information with growing concern. She was facing institutional corruption that went far beyond typical teenage rebellion. "How do other teachers handle them?" she asked. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression was answer enough. "Most don't last long enough to develop strategies." She admitted, "The Martinez family transferred after 2 months. The Hendersons made it 1 semester before requesting different assignments. The Johnsons quit education entirely after what happened to them." "What happened to the Johnsons?" Clara asked. Though she wasn't sure she wanted to know, Mrs. Rodriguez looked around once more before answering. "Financial investigation that destroyed their credit. Child Protective Services called with anonymous tips about abuse. Social media harassment that forced them to move states." She whispered, "These families have resources that go beyond normal intimidation." Clara drove home that afternoon with new understanding of the forces arrayed against her. She had assumed she was dealing with spoiled teenagers, but Mrs. Rodriguez had revealed a systemic network of wealthy families protecting their children through institutional corruption. The recording device Marcus had given her suddenly felt more necessary than paranoid. That evening, Marcus listened to Clara's briefing with the focused attention he had once given to mission plans in hostile territory. He asked specific questions about timing, participants, and available evidence while taking notes that looked suspiciously like tactical assessments. "This isn't random teenage behavior," he concluded after reviewing her information. "They're conducting psychological warfare with institutional support." He spread a map of the school across their kitchen table. "They'll escalate until you break or quit. The question is how far they're willing to go." "What should I do?" Clara asked, finally admitting that the situation was beyond normal teaching challenges. Marcus studied the school layout with tactical precision. "We prepare for war," he said quietly. "But first, you need to learn how to fight back." He looked at his wife with the protective intensity that had carried him through multiple combat zones. "I can't be with you during school hours, but I can teach you everything I know about psychological warfare and physical defense." The next morning began Clara's real education. Marcus woke her at 5:30 for combat training that would supplement her mathematical knowledge with survival skills. "These boys think they're hunters," he explained while teaching her basic self-defense techniques. "We're going to turn you into something they've never encountered." Clara learned to recognize escalation patterns, document evidence systematically, and identify potential weapons in any environment. Marcus taught her psychological techniques for maintaining composure under pressure and tactical awareness for avoiding ambushes. "Knowledge is power," he said, "but applied knowledge is victory." The boys' campaign intensified during Clara's 4th week at Westmont. They had moved beyond verbal sparring into property destruction that tested the boundaries of criminal behavior. Clara's car was keyed in the faculty parking lot. Deep scratches spelled out words that made her stomach turn, while security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact time frame of the vandalism. Her classroom became a battleground of subtle sabotage. Expensive calculators disappeared from locked cabinets. Mathematical models were broken and arranged like threats. Personal items vanished only to reappear in humiliating locations. Each incident was carefully calculated to maximize psychological impact while maintaining plausible deniability. The harassment followed her home through digital channels. Anonymous social media accounts posted photoshopped images that suggested inappropriate behavior. Fake reviews appeared on professional websites questioning her qualifications, and email accounts received threatening messages that were carefully worded to avoid direct legal liability. Clara documented everything with the thoroughness Marcus had taught her. Each incident was photographed, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with witness availability and security camera coverage. Her evidence file grew thicker while her stress levels increased. The boys were conducting systematic psychological warfare that most people would find impossible to endure. Principal Parker called Clara for another meeting. This time, his office felt more like an interrogation room than administrative space. "Some influential families are expressing concerns about your teaching methods," he said, shuffling through printed complaints that had arrived with suspicious coordination. "What specific concerns?" Clara asked, forcing him to either provide concrete criticism or admit that the complaints were vague harassment. Principal Parker shifted uncomfortably. "General concerns about curriculum difficulty and, cultural fit with our school environment," he said. Avoiding eye contact, the racial subtext was barely hidden behind administrative language. Clara felt anger rising, but maintained professional composure. "Are you questioning my qualifications to teach advanced mathematics?" she asked directly. Principal Parker realized he was treading on legally dangerous ground. "Not at all." He backtracked quickly. "I'm simply suggesting that you might be happier at a school with students who are more, shall we say, accustomed to your teaching style." The coded language was clear. He wanted her gone before the situation escalated further. "I'm here to teach mathematics to any student willing to learn," Clara replied firmly. "If parents have specific academic concerns, I'm happy to address them through proper channels." She stood to leave. "Is there anything else?" "Principal Parker." His expression told her everything. The administrative pressure would continue until she quit, or they found grounds for termination. Clara left his office knowing that the boys had successfully weaponized the institutional system against her. Their family's influence had turned school administration into another tool of harassment. That afternoon, Clara stayed late to prepare lessons for students who actually wanted to learn. The building was mostly empty except for dedicated teachers and evening custodial staff. She didn't notice the group of boys who had returned after hours. Her focus was on grading papers and planning instruction that could penetrate the wall of deliberate ignorance her tormentors had constructed. James Mitchell, Tyler Brooks, Connor Hayes, and Dylan Parker had spent hours planning their final lesson for the troublesome teacher. They had rope from the gymnasium equipment room, phones ready to record everything, and knowledge that security was conveniently absent. The oak tree in the courtyard held historical significance that would make their demonstration particularly meaningful. "Time to show her where she belongs," James announced as they approached Clara's classroom. The door was unlocked, and she was alone at her desk, with papers spread around her like shields that couldn't protect against what was coming. The boys entered with predatory confidence. They had never faced real consequences for anything, and this felt like another entertaining game that would end with their complete victory. Clara looked up from her work. Something in their body language triggered alarm bells that Marcus had taught her to recognize. "Gentlemen, school hours are over," she said calmly, her hand moving toward the panic button Marcus had installed under her desk. "You should head home for the evening." But her movement was too obvious. Tyler lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. "Actually, we think you should come with us," James replied, his voice carrying a new edge that revealed his true nature. "There's something we want to show you outside." Connor moved to block the doorway while Dylan locked it from inside. Clara realized this wasn't spontaneous confrontation, but carefully planned assault. The next 30 minutes would test everything Marcus had taught Clara about survival. They would also trigger responses from a Delta Force veteran that these privileged boys were completely unprepared to face. The recording device in Clara's jacket captured every word as they forced her toward the courtyard. Evidence was being created that would destroy their lives completely. The oak tree stood like a monument to historical injustices. Generations of students had carved initials into its bark, but none had witnessed anything like what was about to happen. James pulled rope from his backpack while his friends formed a circle around Clara. Their phones were already recording what they assumed would be their moment of ultimate victory. "This is where people like you belong," Connor announced, enjoying the power he felt over an adult authority figure. "Maybe now you'll understand Westmont Academy's real standards." Clara forced herself to remain calm while memorizing every detail. Marcus had taught her that survival often depended on gathering intelligence even under extreme stress. But as the rope tightened around her wrists and the boys celebrated their perceived triumph, Clara smiled. They didn't know about the training she had received, the evidence being recorded, or the Delta Force veteran who would soon receive her emergency signal. These spoiled children had chosen the wrong teacher to terrorize. They were about to learn the difference between playing with power and facing someone who had been taught to wield it professionally. The real education was about to begin. The rope burns against Clara's wrists as James Mitchell III steps back to admire their handiwork. His phone captures every angle while Tyler Brooks circles like a predator savoring his kill. "Say goodbye to your teaching career." Connor Hayes laughs, zooming in on Clara's face. "This video goes viral unless you resign tomorrow morning." But Clara isn't the helpless victim they expect. 3 weeks of Marcus's training have taught her to recognize opportunity within crisis. "You boys are making a serious mistake," she says calmly, her voice carrying authority that makes Dylan Parker hesitate. "Do you really think your families can protect you from federal hate crime charges?" The boys laugh. They've never faced consequences for anything, and this woman's continued defiance feels more amusing than threatening. "Federal crimes," James mocks, adjusting his expensive camera angle. "We're just showing the new teacher around campus." And what they don't see is the small recording device in Clara's jacket transmitting everything to Marcus's phone 40 miles away. What they can't imagine is that a Delta Force veteran is already analyzing their tactical position and planning their complete destruction. The emergency signal reaches Marcus during his security consultation meeting. 15 years of combat experience processes the situation instantly. Marcus Washington excuses himself from the corporate boardroom. His client notices the sudden change in demeanor, but doesn't question someone with Marcus's military bearing. Emergency situation, Marcus explains briefly, already moving toward the exit. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. The audio feed from Clara's device paints a tactical picture that makes Marcus's blood run cold. 4 hostiles. Isolated location. His wife in immediate danger. But Delta Force training demands strategic thinking over emotional reaction. He activates networks that these boys couldn't imagine while driving toward Westmont Academy with controlled precision. "Sarah, it's Marcus Washington," he says into his Bluetooth headset. FBI agent Sarah Mitchell answers on the first ring, recognizing the urgency in her former teammate's voice. "I need immediate federal response to a hate crime in progress." He transmits GPS coordinates while explaining the situation. Sarah's team begins mobilizing before he finishes speaking. The second call reaches David Chen, federal prosecutor and father of Jenny Chen. His daughter had mentioned concerning behavior at Westmont Academy, and Marcus's evidence confirms his worst fears. "Get recording equipment to the school immediately," Marcus instructs. "We need federal documentation of everything happening." Maria Rodriguez receives the third call, the civil rights attorney and Mrs. Rodriguez's sister had been waiting for evidence strong enough to challenge Westmont's institutional corruption. "This is what we've been building toward," Marcus explains. "These families are about to learn that money can't buy immunity from federal law." But first, Marcus must extract Clara safely. He reaches the school parking lot and recognizes the tactical situation immediately. 4 luxury cars indicate the boys are still on campus. Security booth is empty, suggesting planned coordination. Courtyard location provides multiple escape routes, but also maximum exposure for their criminal activity. Marcus approaches with ghost-like precision. 15 years of eliminating high-value targets taught him to move through hostile territory without detection. He photographs license plates, documents escape routes, and records everything while positioning himself for intervention. The audio feed reveals escalating threats. "This is what happens to uppity teachers who forget their place." James sneers into his camera. "Maybe next time you'll remember that some schools aren't meant for people like you." Marcus has heard enough. He steps from the shadows with tactical timing that catches all 4 boys completely off guard. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he says quietly, his voice carrying more menace than any shouting could achieve. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The boys spin around in shock. They had assumed the building was empty and hadn't planned for adult intervention. Marcus stands 6 feet tall with bearing that speaks of comfort with violence. His calm demeanor is more terrifying than rage would be. "Who the hell are you?" James demands, his governor's son arrogance briefly masking growing fear. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." His phone continues recording, but now he's capturing evidence of his own destruction. "Marcus Washington, United States Army retired," he replies, showing military identification. "That's my wife you've tied to a tree." His voice remains conversational, but something in his eyes makes Tyler step backward involuntarily. Connor tries to assert his police chief son's authority. "My father runs law enforcement in this county, and you need to leave immediately before I call for backup." Marcus smiles. It's not a pleasant expression. "Your father's the police chief?" Marcus asks, his tactical mind processing corruption networks and institutional failures. "How convenient. I'll mention his son's extracurricular activities when I brief federal investigators." The mention of federal authority changes everything. These boys had grown up believing local influence made them untouchable. But Marcus operates on levels they couldn't comprehend. Dylan attempts damage control. This is just a misunderstanding between students and teacher. Assault, kidnapping, creation of hate crime documentation. Marcus lists calmly while untying Clara's restraints. Those are federal felonies, not student-teacher misunderstandings. Clara's hands are free. She rubs circulation back into her wrists while studying her husband's tactical assessment of the situation. "You can't prove anything," Tyler blusters, his banking family's legal troubles suddenly seeming more serious. "It's our word against yours." Marcus holds up his phone, showing that everything had been recorded. The boys realize they've been documenting their own federal crimes. James Mitchell III, governor's son, multiple disciplinary cover-ups, Harvard application under federal review. Marcus recites with precision that makes the boy's face go white. Tyler Brooks, banking family currently investigated for money laundering. Trust fund frozen pending criminal proceedings. He continues the intelligence parade. Connor Hayes, police chief's son with sealed juvenile records that won't stay sealed under federal scrutiny. Dylan Parker, principal's son, whose father is about to lose everything. Each revelation hits like physical blows. How could this man know confidential information? Delete those videos immediately. Marcus orders with absolute authority. Then sit down while I call appropriate agencies. But James tries one final assertion of privilege. "Do you know who we are? Our families own this town. Your families are about to own federal prison sentences." Marcus replies, 15 years in Delta Force teaches you to research enemies thoroughly. He speed dials numbers that activate networks these boys never imagined. Federal investigators, civil rights attorneys, military veterans organizations, media contacts who specialized in exposing institutional corruption. Within minutes, the courtyard fills with professionals who couldn't be influenced by local political pressure. FBI agents arrive before local police. Evidence collection begins immediately, and phones are confiscated as federal crime scene materials. Agent Sarah Mitchell takes charge with military precision. "This is a federal hate crime investigation," she announces to Principal Parker, who arrives 20 minutes too late. "Your son is among the suspects." Dylan's father realizes that his job, pension, and reputation are forfeit. The boys find themselves separated and questioned by investigators who weren't impressed by Daddy's influence. Their phones contained months of harassment documentation. Their social media revealed systematic targeting of minorities. Their text messages provided conspiracy evidence that prosecutors dream about finding. But Clara's real education was just beginning. Marcus had neutralized the immediate threat. But systemic change required strategic warfare that went far beyond single confrontations. This was just the opening move. He explained that evening while reviewing federal case files. These families have been hiding behind institutional protection for decades. The next morning brought Clara to Marcus's private training facility, if she was going to survive in an environment designed to destroy her. She needed capabilities that went beyond mathematical knowledge. Physical confrontation was inevitable, Marcus explained while demonstrating defensive techniques. Now you need skills that make you predator instead of prey. Clara learned combat psychology that transformed her understanding of power dynamics, how confidence changed body language, how tactical awareness prevented ambushes, how strategic thinking turned weaknesses into advantages. Every skill applies to classroom management. Marcus explained, bullies respond to strength, not reasoning. The combat training was intense but necessary. Clara practiced defensive techniques until muscle memory replaced conscious thought, studied psychological warfare until she could recognize manipulation attempts immediately, and learned evidence collection methods that would support legal proceedings. These boys will escalate when they're released on bail, Marcus warned while teaching surveillance detection. Their families will pressure them to intimidate witnesses and destroy evidence. Clara nodded grimly. She understood that federal charges only made her enemies more desperate and dangerous. 3 days later, Clara returned to Westmont Academy with capabilities the boys couldn't imagine. She walked through hallways with tactical awareness that noticed everything, entered her classroom with confidence that commanded immediate respect, and taught mathematics with authority that brooks no challenge. The 4 boys were indeed out on bail. Their families had hired expensive lawyers who specialized in making federal charges disappear through procedural challenges and judicial influence. James Mitchell sat in the back corner with barely controlled rage. Federal investigators had seized his phone, frozen his college applications, and placed his family under media scrutiny that threatened his father's political career. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Clara said calmly, her voice carrying new authority that made other students pay attention. "I trust your legal proceedings aren't interfering with your calculus education." The public reference to his criminal charges sent shockwaves through the classroom. James felt his face burn with humiliation. No teacher had ever spoken to him that way, especially not in front of witnesses. "Actually, my lawyer says we're victims of false accusations from someone who doesn't understand Westmont Academy's standards," he replied, trying to regain psychological advantage. "Federal prosecutors don't pursue false accusations," Clara responded without turning around. "They pursue federal crimes with sufficient evidence for conviction." She continued writing equations while other students exchanged glances. Their untouchable classmate was being publicly destroyed by the woman he had terrorized. Tyler Brooks decided to escalate. "My family's lawyers say this whole thing will disappear once proper authorities review the evidence objectively." His banking connections had always provided protection before. Federal investigation was a new experience that terrified him. Clara faced the class directly. "Your family's banking business is under federal oversight for money laundering," she said matter-of-factly. "I doubt their lawyers have time for high school disciplinary issues." The public humiliation was calculated and devastating. Tyler's untouchable status evaporated before his classmates' eyes. Connor Hayes tried psychological intimidation. "My father says federal investigators often target innocent families when they need statistics for political purposes." His police chief father had always made problems disappear. Federal jurisdiction was foreign territory. "Your father resigned yesterday to avoid corruption charges," Clara replied calmly. "Perhaps you should focus on mathematics instead of law enforcement fantasies." The destruction was surgical and complete. Connor's protective network had collapsed overnight. Dylan Parker played his final card. "My father still runs this school, and he can make your life very difficult if you continue these personal attacks." His principal's son privilege felt like armor that couldn't be penetrated. "Your father was suspended pending federal investigation into institutional corruption," Clara informed him. "I suggest you concentrate on passing calculus since your academic future depends entirely on merit now." The systematic demolition was emotionally satisfying but strategically dangerous. Class ended with 4 humiliated boys plotting revenge, while 23 other students realized their social hierarchy had shifted dramatically. Clara Washington was no longer prey but predator, and the boys who had terrorized her were revealed as paper tigers protected only by family wealth. That afternoon brought the retaliation Marcus had predicted. Clara's car tires were slashed in the faculty parking lot. Threatening messages appeared on her classroom whiteboard, and anonymous calls to Child Protective Services alleged abuse of students. The boys were escalating according to patterns that Marcus recognized from psychological warfare manuals. "They're desperate now," he explained while reviewing security footage from cameras he had installed around their property. "Desperate enemies make mistakes. but they're also most dangerous. Clara nodded. 3 days of combat training had taught her to recognize threat escalation patterns. The next morning brought federal marshals to Westmont Academy. Agent Mitchell served additional warrants that expanded the investigation into institutional corruption, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. The boys watched helplessly as evidence lockers were removed from administrative offices. Principal Parker tried damage control. This is harassment of prominent families by federal agents seeking publicity, he announced to assembled media crews, but his suspension notice arrived before he finished speaking. Dylan watched his father's career die in real time. Clara entered her classroom that morning to find it vandalized beyond repair. Equations were defaced with racial slurs. Desks were overturned, and broken glass covered the floor. The message was clear. If legal intimidation failed, the boys would resort to destruction and violence. But Marcus had anticipated escalation. Security cameras captured everything, and the vandalism provided additional federal evidence that strengthened hate crime prosecutions. "They're building our case for us," he observed while reviewing footage. "Every crime adds years to their sentences." And the boys tried one final intimidation attempt. They cornered Clara in the parking lot after school, surrounding her car with threatening body language that suggested physical violence. "You should have quit when you had the chance," James snarled. "Now we're going to destroy you completely." Clara smiled. Weeks of combat training had prepared her for exactly this moment. "Gentlemen, you're violating federal bail conditions by approaching me," she said calmly. "I suggest you step back before this becomes another criminal charge." Tyler laughed. "Who's going to stop us? Your husband isn't here to protect you now." But Clara's confidence didn't waver. Marcus had taught her that strength came from knowledge, preparation, and tactical thinking. "Actually, he is," Clara replied, pointing to the surveillance van parked across the street. Federal agents emerged with cameras that had recorded everything. The boys found themselves arrested again before they could retreat. Bail violations added to their growing list of federal charges. The trial became a national sensation. Clara's testimony was broadcast live as she described systematic harassment that escalated to hate crimes and institutional corruption. Marcus's evidence presentation was unassailable. His military precision had documented everything with thoroughness that defense lawyers couldn't challenge. These young men believed privilege made them untouchable. Clara told the packed courtroom. They needed to learn that in America. Justice applies equally regardless of family wealth or political connections. The judge's sentence reflected the seriousness of federal hate crimes. All 4 boys received significant prison time and permanent criminal records. But Clara's real victory was personal transformation. She had evolved from victim to warrior through training that revealed capabilities she never knew she possessed. "I came to teach mathematics," she reflected during media interviews. "I learned to fight for justice instead." Westmont Academy implemented comprehensive reforms under federal oversight. New anti-bullying policies included criminal prosecution for hate crimes. Mandatory diversity training became required for all staff and students. And Clara Washington was promoted to head of mathematics, with tenure protection that couldn't be challenged. The oak tree in the courtyard became a memorial to courage and determination. A plaque commemorated Clara's fight against institutional racism and the community's commitment to justice. Students passed by daily, understanding that real change comes when good people refuse to be silenced. Marcus established a scholarship fund for minority educators facing similar challenges. Applications came from across the country as word spread about resources available for teachers confronting discrimination. The Military Veterans Network he activated became permanent protection for educators threatened by wealthy families. Years later, Clara would reflect on that terrible afternoon as the moment everything changed, not just for her, but for an entire system that had protected privilege over justice. The boys learned that actions have consequences. Their families discovered that money couldn't buy immunity from federal law. The annual Westmont Academy graduation ceremony now includes the Clara Washington Award for Courage in Education. Recipients receive scholarship funds and protection from veterans networks that Marcus established. Her legacy inspired other educators to stand against discrimination wherever they encountered it. James Mitchell served 2 years in federal prison. His release came with mandatory community service teaching literacy to underprivileged children. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The boy who had terrorized a black teacher now worked under supervision of educators he had once dismissed. Tyler Brooks discovered that federal banking investigations don't disappear with family connections. His trust fund remained frozen through 3 years of money laundering proceedings that destroyed his family's financial empire. Connor Hayes became a cautionary tale told in police academies nationwide. His father's resignation opened investigations into decades of covered-up misconduct. Dylan Parker's family moved across the country. The principal's son found himself attending public school, where his name meant nothing, and his attitude earned immediate correction from teachers who wouldn't tolerate disrespect. Marcus and Clara's marriage grew stronger through shared adversity. Their partnership proved that military precision and educational passion combined to create unstoppable forces for justice. They speak at conferences nationwide, teaching couples how to face institutional corruption together. The recording device that started everything became evidence in dozens of similar cases. Marcus's tactical methods were adopted by civil rights organizations fighting educational discrimination. Clara's transformation from victim to victor inspired a generation of teachers who refused to be intimidated by wealthy bullies. True strength isn't avoiding the fight. It's choosing when and how to fight back, with overwhelming preparation and unshakable moral authority. Clara Washington learned that lesson tied to an oak tree. James Mitchell and his friends learned it in federal prison, where Daddy's money meant nothing. The oak tree still stands in Westmont Academy's courtyard. Students pass by daily, most unaware of the history embedded in its bark. But those who know the story understand that real change comes when good people refuse to be silenced, when professionals use their skills for justice, and when communities decide that privilege ends where human dignity begins. Clara Washington still teaches mathematics. Her classroom is now filled with students who understand that respect isn't negotiable. That authority must be earned, and that some lessons are too important to be forgotten. The equation she teaches most often isn't mathematical. It's the simple formula that courage plus preparation equals justice, and justice applied consistently equals lasting change.